Hi, in this video I just want to go over a few of the things we talked about last week in class when I was demonstrating Maya and you were modeling the eye. Just a few settings that need to be changed in the Mac OS to make the mouse work the way we want it to. And I want to talk a little bit about the difference between objects and components and how to select them and manipulate them. In a later video I'm going to talk about display layers and incremental saves. So let's just take a look here. Now you're all using, if you're working at in the CCT building, the Mighty Mouse, which is a 3-button mouse. It actually has lots of buttons, sort of invisible buttons, but it's a little finicky to use with Maya, and we have to make sure the settings are correct. Now you don't do this through Maya, you do it through the system preferences, and you access that through this little apple up in the top left corner and go down here to system preferences to change a couple of things. Keyboard and mouse, I've already changed mine, so let me put it back to the way you'll see it. But it may appear this way, so you can see that the primary button is here. That means the left mouse button. Over here on the right side should be the right mouse button, but here it's also listed as the primary button, so we have to change this to the secondary button. And then it should work the way you need it to in Maya. There are these other buttons along the side here. If you squeeze the sides of the mouse together, it can do things. I find that a little annoying at times. And so you can just turn it off here if you want to, but you don't have to. It's up to you. You can change the speed of your mouse on screen to be slower or faster. That is how responsive it is to your hand movements. See, mine's sort of set to the middle. The other thing you have to change is up here, we go back to Show All and System Preferences, Expose and Spaces. If we go to Expose, these are all shortcuts to make these little Mac OS things happen. And you may find in one of these ones here, one of your mouse buttons is listed. And that will interrupt your workflow when you're working in Maya and will make it not possible for you to do the things you need to do. So just make sure these things are all turned to the little dash, so that none of your mouse buttons are doing any of these things up here. Okay, and if you do that, everything should be good. Now you'll have to do that every time you log into these machines, unfortunately, until we figure out a way to save your preferences, which may never happen in this semester. So you just have to go in and do that little warm-up ritual to make sure things are going to work properly. So here we are again in Maya, and I just want to take a look at, first of all, selecting objects. So let me just create a little object here, make a cube. So if I select this object, if I just left mouse drag over it, you can see that it's highlighted in green. That means it's the selected object. If I want to deselect it, I can just click away anywhere in the environment, and now it's no longer selected. When it's selected, I can see certain attributes that it has. I can apply different things to it, but we just need to be able to select and deselect for now. Now, if I have more than one object, say I create a polygon sphere, just move it over here. I can select more than one object by marquee selecting around 2 objects. So now they're both selected. The most recently selected one is in green, and anything that was selected before in this group is in white. So even if I have lots of objects, if I select them all, one will be green, the rest will be white. The green is the most recently selected. If I want to select these all in sequence, I can select one, then hold down the Shift key, and it will add to my selection, so I can select more than one thing at a time that way. So if I want to marquee select everything, I can do it that way, but say I just want this one and this one, I can just do it that way with the Shift key held down. So let me just get rid of this one. If I want to delete an object, I can just select it and hit the delete key on the keyboard. Holding down the Shift key when you select is also a way to toggle select. So for example, if I have this one selected but not this one, then hold down Shift and select both of them, this one will become deselected while this one becomes selected. So it's reversing its selection status If I do it again, it will reverse. Now this can be useful when you're doing some more complex selecting of certain items, when you want to reverse your selections and so on. There's other selection techniques that will be useful when we get into component mode, but we won't talk about them just yet. Let's look at component mode. So when we look at an object and I select it this way, I'm in object mode, so I've selected the entire object. So you can see now that I've got my move tool selected. That's W on the keyboard. I can just move the entire object. If I hit E, I'm going to go into rotate tool and I can rotate the entire object. If I hit R, I go into scale mode and I can scale the entire object. Scale mode here. So that's how we can influence the object as a whole, but we can also influence the object at the level of its components, the things that it's made up of that define its shape. And that's what we'll be doing when we do our face model. We're going to start from a simple cube like this, but by adding components and manipulating their position, we'll approximate the shape of the face. So if you have your right mouse button working, which you should now that you've changed those preferences, and you right mouse button over an object, and I'm holding down the right mouse button, you can see it gives me the contextual menu. So just ignore all this stuff down here. Just look at this little circular set of options here. It allows me to select between object mode, face mode, vertex mode, and edge mode. Don't worry about vertex face and UV. It's not really important for what we're doing here. But let's look at these different kinds of components: face, vertex, and edge. So if I go into face mode, you can see that the object turns blue, which tells me I'm in component mode. The highlighting of the object turns blue, I should say. And then in the middle of each of these broad planes that define the sides of the cube, we have our faces, our face selection handles. So if I click on this one, it kind of turns an orangey brown, and I've got just this face selected. And I can scale just this face. They're all attached to each other, so if I scale this one, it's going to influence the other ones, but I'm not scaling them directly. I can also move it on its own, or I can rotate it on its own. I can select more than one face. If I hold down Shift and click on that, now I've got these two faces selected, and I can rotate those two faces. I can scale those two faces, or I can move those two faces. You can see it influences the whole model, but I'm not actually moving the whole model. This part's staying stuck in place. I can also select more than one face by marquee selecting them. You just have to be careful. And you can see when I'm working here, I'm constantly flipping around to make sure I've got the thing selected that I want, because I may be working this way and I want to select this face. I start to do stuff and I rotate it. I realize, hey, what's going on? In fact, I've selected the face on the back as well. So I'm just constantly moving around to make sure I've got the selection correct. And you'll be doing the same thing when you model your face. I mean your real face, your forensic face. If I want to deselect this one, I can just shift select it, and I'm left with this one. So those are faces. You'll be doing some manipulation of faces by when you build the nose and the ear and things like that. You can also select things in edge mode, and that's selecting these lines here that divide the faces. And again, you can do all the same things. You can move single edges, you can rotate them, you can scale the edge, you can select more than one edge at once and scale to make different shapes. So just get in and try to play with this, get a feel for what's going on. And lastly, there is a component mode called vertex mode. This is what you'll be using a lot of. Vertex, or vertices, the plural of vertex, are these little purple dots at the corners of objects, or not necessarily corners, because this is a cube, so it's got clearly defined corners, but at the intersection of separate edges, you'll find a vertex. So we've got three edges coming together here, and they're united at this vertex. So I can move individual vertices around. Can't really rotate an individual vertex because it's a infinitely small point in space, but if I select more than one, then I can rotate them together. Same thing with scaling. You can scale two. Can't really scale one because it's an infinitely small point with no dimension other than a position in space. But you're going to be doing this sort of work mostly manipulating, grabbing vertices, looking at them in different views to approximate different shapes. You'll notice that when I went into these views, I'm in wireframe mode, and just as a reminder, to go into shaded mode, you hit 5. To go into wireframe mode, you hit 4. So 4 for wireframe, 5 for shaded, 6 for shaded with textures. But we don't have any textures on here. The one example you've seen is of the texture we used to model the eye that was on that plane. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to mention here. Yes, so you know how to change your mouse settings. You've got some introduction to components and objects. Oh, I remember one other thing. Other than using the right mouse button to jump to different components or to the object mode, if I go into object mode, you can actually toggle between component and object mode using the F8 key. On your keyboards you have to hold down the Fn key, which is the function key, which is sort of in the middle column beside your home key, and then hit F8 and that will toggle between component and object mode. So that's handy too. Okay, so I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.